Hello and welcome back to the AI for PR conference, where I'm joined now by Alistair Wheate, who is the Principal Solution Strategist at PR Newswire. Alistair, thank you very much for joining me. It's a real pleasure to be chatting with you today. I think the first thing I wanted to ask you about is how comms professionals sort of factor in growing public use of LLMs and that kind of thing. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, first thing to say is that comms professionals need to just accept that this is not going to go away. It's only going to get bigger. More and more people are using LLMs for a variety of decision-making purchases and just doing general research on brands or finding information on questions that they have. So the way that I'd answer that is to maybe just rewind a bit to the previous big disruption that we had in the comms space, which was the advent of social media. And nowadays, no comms professional would be thinking that social media is a kind of an add-on or something separate that they don't really need to pay attention to. It's very much an integrated core part of comms, both in your evaluation and in your planning and strategy. So now it's the same thing with LLMs. Comms professionals need to be thinking about how they evaluate it. So people are reading the answers of LLMs. How do you use that in your evaluation alongside evaluation of news coverage and social media coverage? And then in your planning, what do you need to do differently in your communications to try and maximize the likelihood that the LLM responses are going to say the sorts of things that you want them to be saying as a brand?
No, absolutely. It's very interesting. And what do you think some of the skills and tools that comms teams should be sort of focusing on this very new environment?
So first of all, comms professionals need to really understand how LLMs work and what sort of things the LLMs are saying in response to the questions that are going to be relevant to their brand. Some of those will be unbranded kind of discovery questions, so people just asking a question to an LLM, and then at those points the LLM might mention the brand, or it could be people asking questions specifically about the brand. How are the LLMs talking about your brand? So the comms professionals need to then have tools that can try to map out what those responses look like, and not just to do it at a very kind of token level of just picking a couple of dozen prompts. They need to do this really at scale, because these are probabilistic engines. We need to maybe track thousands of prompts, or maybe tens of thousands or more, to get a proper sense of how these different LLMs behave. And also they behave differently. You know, ChatGPT will work differently to Gemini. So there's that evaluation piece, and there's also then the comms piece, the output piece. I'd say the humble press release has got a kind of a new life in this domain, in that you can use newswires as a way of getting your message out onto authoritative sources that are then picked up by the LLM. So, you know, obviously PR Newswire is one of the most cited domains now across all prompts. And so this is a great tool that PR people have to quickly get their message out, but to make sure that you're doing that consistently with other communications. So your social media output, the content you're putting on your website, the messages that you're putting out to journalists, all need to be done with a consistent approach so that you maximize the chance of an LLM really picking up the messages that you want to get out as a comms professional.
Absolutely, and that leads me on really well to the next question, which is about journalism and sort of their perspective of things. So in this new environment, how are they sort of discovering and researching all this information and sort of therefore being able to report on brands and organizations and so forth?
Yeah, so again, rewinding a bit to how kind of social media disrupted the landscape, there was this talk many years ago when Twitter really came to the fore that this was the main place that people would get news from now. And I think we can all say that's probably not really the case. It's great social media for engaging with audiences, having kind of authentic conversations, but it's increasingly challenging space now because of bot networks, deepfakes, lots of misinformation online. Some of that is state-run interference from actors like Russia, but journalists need to be getting access to information, so they will be looking at social media, but also need to be able to very quickly get to the facts. And so this is where comms from teams through official channels is going to be really important to get through the noise. And also making sure that you're not over-relying on AI to create content. For journalists to write content, they need to be thinking about a way of differentiating the stories that they're writing from all of the AI slop that's coming from other sources online. So they need to think of their own content and having a unique voice. And that's where things like personal stories, data-backed research, and personal experience from the brands will really help the journalists to have content that stands out.
No, I think that's absolutely right. Let's talk a little bit about metrics. So we're all aware of traditional metrics like impressions and reach and that kind of thing, but we live in a very different landscape now. So what are some of the new metrics that people should be looking out for that sort of really demonstrate real impact?
Well, the obvious one now that's been talked about a lot in this kind of GEO topic, generative engine optimization, there's loads of other variations on that, is citations. So trying to understand when LLMs are talking about your brand, which domains, which URLs are the LLMs then using to back up the answers that they're giving. And so this is obviously kind of adjacent to SEO. A lot of SEO people want to kind of make sure that those links are going through to the website. But as comms people, we're not necessarily focused just on getting kind of traffic from those answers. We want to make sure that the answers that the LLMs are giving, have the right kind of narrative about our brand. So we need to be able to measure the output of the LLMs in a similar way that we would measure all other comms. But it's difficult because it's not like one article that you can just point to and say, well, that's the article. Different people will get different responses. So you have to take a maybe more kind of nuanced approach and also look at kind of averages. What is the kind of the mean response of LLMs when they're asked a certain question? And then also looking at the domains that those LLMs are citing. Are those the right sort of sources that we believe are credible in our space? So there are basically similar metrics to how comms people would evaluate news and social media, but they need to look at how it works differently with LLMs.
Absolutely. And just finally, is there one particular trend you're noticing that's perhaps underestimated by people in the comms industry? And if so, why do you think that's the case?
Oh, that's a good question. A trend that's underestimated. I think for comms people, it's going to be very interesting, I think, to see the way in which certain LLMs maybe partner with certain publishers. And so I think, generally speaking, PR people need to understand the lexicon of LLMs, so understanding things like retrieval augmented generation, fan-out queries, the EEAT framework of search. Because if you ask a question as a user of ChatGPT, quite often what that platform will then do is maybe convert your search into maybe a dozen separate searches and go and find information from around the web. And some of those LLMs now will actually directly go and find and seek out, as one of those fan-out queries, information on your website or information on publishers that they have partnerships with. So, for example, like ChatGPT, OpenAI has a partnership with Reuters and with the Associated Press. So they have a kind of a bias towards some of those publishers in the responses that they generate because they specifically seek that out. So I think PR people need to understand that mechanism of fan-out queries, and that certain LLMs have got a preference for very specific sources, and also that they will direct some of the searches to the brand's own website. So you really need to make sure that you're very quick as a comms person on updating your own website if there's something that's in the public sphere that people might be searching for, because you want to make sure that the answers that LLMs find will be answered with your own official content.
Well, change can be scary, but also makes it a very interesting time. Alistair, thank you so much for your time.
Great, thank you.